Hi, everyone. As David mentioned, I'm Micaela, and today we'll be talking about how to embed human in the loop into your MLOps stack and why that's so important. I believe there's a Q&A widget down in the bottom. If you have any questions, you can feel free to throw them there, and we'll address them at the end. Alrighty, so the first question we need to answer today is why bother evaluating your GenAI in the first place? And there's a really quick answer to that question. It's compliance. Whether you're working in enterprise or working with government compliance rules, critical systems need to perform well, and we need to trust and understand them. And the best way to do that is by putting a human in the loop in your system and by evaluating your systems in general. So let's take a minute to talk about what GenAI evaluations look like today. I know that this word eval has been thrown around a lot recently. It's getting a lot of hype. Let's break it down and see what it really means. So you might be familiar with statistical metrics like precision or recall or F1 in our more traditional machine learning spaces. These are great. They're really insightful. They give us really deep information about where our models are performing well, where they can do better, but they require a right answer to check against. In precision recall F1 metrics, we compare the actual output to a correct output to calculate things like true positives, false negatives, and true negatives. The question is, what does right mean to GenAI? As we know, these models are not discriminative, which means they give us a different answer every time. And with generative answers or long-form text, there could be more than one right way to say the same answer. And there could also be more than one wrong way to say the same answer. You can think about this a little bit as the difference between your math teacher and your English teacher in high school or your language teacher in high school. Your math teacher was probably grading you on a binary rubric. Did you get the answer right, yes or no? And your English teacher or your language teacher was probably grading you on a more rubric-based scale. So that brings us to our next section, rubric-based evaluations. This is where you evaluate a response based on some criteria. So here you can see a chart of some of these example rubrics that we've generated. Everything has a category, some sub-criteria, a score, the score that the model received, a max score, and some evaluator notes. This is really, really helpful, especially in the GenAI world where there's more than one right way to say things, because it gives you a more holistic approach to evaluating your GenAI. But the question becomes, how are you going to create these criteria and how will you grade the responses? Creating the criteria often requires subject matter experts who really know what it is you're looking for and what right and wrong could mean. And grading the responses could involve the same type of subject matter expertise, or in some cases, you can use a model. Using a model to do these kinds of evaluations is what we call the LLM as a judge technique. I love this little picture of our little judge robot. As I mentioned, this is where you use another LLM to judge the outputs of your model or system. These are especially good in cases where you do have a correct answer because it's really easy to spot the difference. But they're also pretty good at evaluating these rubric-based criteria. However, LLM as a judge models are still at their base an LLM, which means we still don't know exactly how they're performing or exactly what will be right and wrong. And models are not right 100% of the time, as we know. So the question becomes, how do you know that your judge is acting in line with your expectations? And the answer to all of these questions is very simple. It's humans in the loop. And this can look in a lot of different ways for a lot of different types of problems. But I'm going to explain to you now why the different roles that humans can play in this practice and why it's so important that humans play all of these roles together at the same time. So the first is humans as evaluators. This is sort of your most traditional understanding of what human in the loop looks like. You can evaluate your LLM as a judge or other models or systems by hand. This is going to help you to understand edge cases and nuance that LLMs and other models might not be able to pick up on, especially in subjective cases or in more less fact-based, more subjective cases. The humans are really going to be able to understand the nuance and the difference that a model simply doesn't have the context to understand. Humans can also bring in other kinds of outside knowledge or outside expectations that might be difficult to impart to a model. This is especially good when you're at the beginning stages of your process because it's going to help you figure out where you need to tune your prompts for evaluation and where you might need to change your data set a little bit better to better reflect the real cases in the world. The second role is humans as creators. Humans are going to be your best source of creating all of the tools that you need to evaluate your models properly. They can write your rubrics. This is how you're going to get that real subject matter expert deep into your data and deep into your evaluation criteria so that you know you're evaluating your models correctly. They can also build your prompts. You don't want a model to build your prompt for another model. You're going to get into some kind of weird, nested, everyone's a model, finger pointing sort of situation. By having a human do it, they're going to really be able to impart that same subject matter expertise into your prompt, and it'll help you create sustainable systems. You really want to keep a human in the loop as a creator because you want them to make sure that there is still human knowledge being imparted into your systems. Finally, humans can act as quality control. So if you're looking at a random sample of model predicted outcomes, you can pass them to human evaluation to make sure that your models are doing what you think it's doing. This constant monitoring and evaluation through other methods also allows you to make sure that your models are really continuously doing what you think they're doing. So in this image on the right-hand side here, it might look unfamiliar to some of you. This is a screenshot from the Label Studio product, which we'll go over in a little while. But essentially what we're doing is we're comparing a source translation to a machine translated output. So we're trying to compare the original text to a machine translated text. And here we have a place for annotators to give different star ratings. We can have comments. And in this way, the humans are acting as quality control. They're not doing anything different. They're just evaluating the outputs of a new model. And we can use this as ground truth for future evaluation. And we can also use it to help us figure out the best ways for tuning and changing our models as we go. So hopefully by now I've convinced you that embedding humans in the loop is important and meaningful in your work, even though we're working in GenAI and the models are very, very, very smart. So now I'm going to give you some tips and tricks for how do you embed those human in the loop into your system, because having humans in the loop shouldn't be painful. We as humans don't like to do things that are difficult or challenging for us. And if you make the process of human in the loop tedious or overwhelming or hard to execute, you're not going to do it. So the first tip I can give you is to build custom benchmarks. Hopefully by now, some of you are familiar with this concept of a benchmark. Essentially, a benchmark is a held out test set with a scoring methodology. So just like your test sets of old in traditional machine learning, your test set here is going to involve some set of questions or prompts for your model, along with some sort of scoring methodology. So this might be just regular precision recall F1 if you're working with a case that has the correct output. It might be a set of rubrics and some scoring methodology for that if you're working with more generative AI outputs. And it might be a combination depending on what it is that you're trying to do. So you might be familiar with generic benchmarks. These are things like the AMY, which is a high school math exam. There's also the Health Bench, which came out in the spring at some point, I think May, from OpenAI, which evaluates healthcare-based questions. I know we worked really closely with the group who did a legal benchmark just a couple weeks ago, where they tried to evaluate how well an LLM can do on drafting legal documents. And these generic benchmarks are going to test general knowledge and performance. We might call them off-the-shelf benchmarks. They're going to test things like math or logic problems or reasoning or other like big skill sets of a model. And they're going to use public or semi-public data sets. And these can be really helpful for understanding sort of your baseline understanding of your model, what it is that it's doing, how well it's going to do on a certain type of tasks. But it's not going to help you in your enterprise or in your company or in your environment understand exactly what you need to understand. And this is where custom benchmarks come into play. These are going to test what you care about most. You can test for domain-specific knowledge and jargon. You can use your internal messy data in a safe, controlled way. And you can even evaluate KPIs tied to business outcomes. So in the previous example, we looked at an AMY question, go back to it, where we have an example math problem and the way that two different models evaluated it. And when here we can see very clearly how well these models compare against each other on the same answer. And you can see here, even in this screenshot, that Grok 2 wasn't even correct where DeepSeek was. And if you look at our example here, now we're testing a completely custom use case. So instead of a general math question, we're looking at a case, I believe it's in the financial industry, where a customer wants to withdraw a lot of money, but the withdrawal is unusual. Is it fraud? And in this case, we probably want to look at the scores on a couple of different metrics. So we want to definitely do things like factual correctness. In this case, we want to do risk identification, which generic benchmarks might not text for. We also want to look at regulatory and compliance reasons. So maybe your industry has specific regulatory or compliance criteria that you need to be meeting when you use a generative AI solution. And by using a custom benchmark, you can test for that. We can also do things like balance service and compliance, where if you want to balance the customer service use case with the compliance that you're doing, you can test for KPIs like that by building a custom benchmark. Which is not to say that it's worth spending all of your time building these robust, complete benchmarks right at the beginning of your project. I come from a research-facing background, a product-facing research background, and so I am very familiar with the proof of concept and deep and understanding stages of this chart here. But we know that if you're in a proof of concept, you don't want to be spending all your time on evaluation. You're really just trying to figure out, does my model do what I want it to do? So when you're towards the left-hand side of this chart here, you're looking for key test examples, basic functionality validation. Statistical metrics are going to come in really handy here if you're working on a use case that you can use that for. And you're looking at probably 20 to 50 key tasks that will really help you understand, is this a method worth pursuing, or should I change gears? And then as your project moves through the different stages of development, so too should your benchmark evolve. And I'm going to make a really big caveat here, which is that once you change your benchmark, it's no longer comparable to the benchmarks that came before it. The whole point of a benchmark is that it's a standardized, shared evaluation criteria that you can use to compare different models against each other on the same test set. If you change that benchmark, old runs are no longer comparable, which is why it's really important to make sure that you're building out data sheets to go along with these benchmarks that tell you when they were built, what they include, and when you should use them. So as we deepen our understanding here, we're going to add some more tasks. We might try an off-the-shelf benchmark or out-of-the-box benchmark to start identifying failure patterns and adding judgment metrics and expanding our coverage. Then as we get even more specific, we can add more testing for edge cases, we can add more granular scoring, we can boost our efficiency with LM of the judge methods, and we go on from there. So my second tip is to evaluate real responses. So you might be thinking in the abstract, you might be building your rubrics with general kind of understanding of what you should do. But the best way to do it is to really send a question through your model and then build your rubric based off that question. And then evaluate using your rubric on that real question. So here in this little GIF is a screen grab of our Label Studio platform once again. And in this case, we have the patient question in the blue box. This is from the health bench, so it's a patient question. And then in the pink box, we have our AI response. And you can see here on the right-hand side that I'm going through and filling out the rubric in this like very interactive, streamlined way. Your alternative to this is probably a spreadsheet of some sort, which makes my skin crawl a little bit as you think about how it's hard to follow rows and the amount of scrolling back and forth. But in this way, we can build a really easy to use, robust system that will make it easy for our humans to do what they do best, which is to impart their knowledge on our systems. My third tip for you is to make it easy and to leverage programmatic actions. So in this case here, models are a great starting point, especially if you're trying to evaluate the LM as a judge framework. So in this little screenshot here, it shifted away pretty quick, but it's a GIF, so it will rotate in just a second. We're using a tool in Label Studio called Prompts, which allows you to run LLM evaluations on your existing data in Label Studio all in one place. You can see we have the prompt here on the left-hand side. It's going to evaluate on our data that we've given it. Here we've given it 3 sample tasks. And as soon as that happens, there we go, it populates. We can now click into our data, see the model prediction, which I'm going to click over to now. And then we can see that it pre-populates a human response for us based off those model predictions. This means our humans don't have to waste their time trying to start from scratch. They can just evaluate and edit the model's responses. This helps us make sure that our models are doing what we think they're doing when they think they're doing it, but also helps our humans become more efficient than ever. Finally, my last tip for you is to embed your evaluations. As I mentioned before, making this difficult is not going to help anybody do their work well. Label Studio has SDKs and webhooks, and in fact, many platforms have SDKs and webhooks that you can use to help build these things into your pipeline. So I don't have a slide for it right now, but if you imagine what the ML lifecycle looks like, there are so many points in which it would be helpful to have a human oversight, whether it's in your pre-production, pre-modeling place where you're trying to generate ground truth data for training, whether it's in your model development phase when you're running benchmarks to see which model might do better where, or how changing a base model might change your external impacts. Maybe you have a model in production and you want to make sure that it's not drifting, or maybe you GPT released a new model and you want to see how the new model might compare to the old model if it's worth upgrading. Building all of your data flow into your pipeline, existing pipelines using SDKs and webhooks will really help to streamline this process in a way that will make it really easy to keep a human in the loop. So with that, I would love to direct you to our website, labelstud.io, Label Studio, which is great for marketing and terrible for SEO. We have a lot of information about custom benchmarks and building benchmarks in our system. We also are an open source product, so labelstud.io is our open source website. HumanSignal is the company and also the enterprise version of our product. And we also have this middle tier called Starter Cloud, which gets you some of the functionality of enterprise, although not all of it. And I'm excited to offer you a free Starter Cloud trial today to go along with that and see if it's worth embedding in your systems as well. So you can go ahead and scan this QR code. It will be available at the conference as well if you attend with us in person to help kickstart your human in the loop journey. And if you want to talk more about human in the loop, you can go ahead and email me at micaela@humansignal.com. If you'll be in person with us this week, you can visit us at booth 21 near the community corner. And we'll have a live demo of our Label Studio tool on the 8th at 3 p.m. at the booth. But of course, if you won't be there in person and you want to learn more, I highly recommend shooting me an email or reaching out to our sales team. There are many of us who would love to chat more about how you can embed human in the loop into your systems. And with that, I don't know if there are any questions. David, I'll pass it back to you.
Thank you so much, Micaela. That was fascinating and very assuring as a human to think about the human's role and perspective in shaping the quality of model output. And yes, for the question and answer, if anybody has a question for Micaela, those 9 dots, 3 by 3 in the bottom right, the meeting tools, if you click there, and then there's the Q&A, and you can post a question through that. And if anyone is formulating a question, in the meantime, I'll ask real quick, in terms of benchmarking, and maybe this is a tricky one to navigate, but I'm curious about when you're evaluating something that could be more subjective, maybe the model giving advice or something, what are some approaches to formulating those sorts of benchmarks?
Yeah, so in those sort of more subjective cases, I highly recommend using a rubric. Rubrics give you the flexibility to really give your model what is pass and fail criteria while allowing room for that nuance. But you want to make sure, like, let's say you're giving advice to a model, you're going to want to ask things like, did the model say that it's a model right off the bat? I know that's a criteria in most of health benches. Did the model start by saying, I am not a human, I am a model? That might be really important pass-fail criteria for you. You might want to ask if the advice was practical. Models often hallucinate, as we know, and you don't want the model to say, I recommend that you just get $1 million and then pay your way out of the situation. That's pretty unrealistic for most people. Similarly, I would recommend embedding your humans as best as possible. No matter what you're giving advice about, maybe it's health, maybe it's legal, maybe it's customer service, whatever it might be, you're going to have folks in your organization who are going to really know what pass-fail criteria for these types of questions should be. And by building rubrics on a question-by-question basis, we can really dig into that nuance and let our humans really provide their expertise in the ways that they know best.
Awesome. And looks like we have a question here. How might this work for putting humans in the loop for performing master data management and judging the decision to merge 2 seemingly identical product or customer records?
Absolutely. So Label Studio is a fully customizable tool. It can handle pretty much any data type you throw at it: images, video, audio, text, time series, PDFs. I could keep going. So in the case of like 2 identical records, my advice would be to set up a project that allows you to compare these side by side, maybe with traces about where they came from or how they were put into your system if you have that information, and then allow a human to go through and say, yes, these are the same, no, these are different, they should stay separate. On a similar note, if you wanted to speed this process up a little bit, you can do, I think it was point number 3, leaning on a model, and go ahead and ask a model to make that prediction ahead of time and have a human validate yes or no. I think putting humans in the loop at any stage is really, really important, and building these kinds of questions and these kinds of interfaces allows our humans to do what they do best, which is make nuanced, meaningful judgments in a way that's not going to be tedious or painful for them.